Okay, so are you ready for this? We're diving into Adam and Eve and the birth of Jesus, how they connect, what it all means.
Yeah, sounds good.
We've got this children's podcast script.
Interesting.
I know what you're thinking. A kid's podcast. But it
Mhm.
actually lays everything out really simply, and
Yeah.
we're going to kind of build from there.
Okay, I like that.
So have you ever noticed how that serpent's promise to Eve that eating the forbidden fruit would make them like God pops up like everywhere?
Yeah.
It's like a key that unlocks something.
Definitely.
And that's kind of where we're going to start our deep dive.
I like it.
What do you think? Good place to start.
Yeah, I think it's a great place to begin because, I mean, it's such a simple line, but it brings up so many questions about human nature, about God, about what it means to, be in the right relationship with God.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like on the surface, it seems like just this tempting offer, but underneath, it's dealing with some really big ideas.
Absolutely.
What did the serpent even mean by like God? Like, was it knowledge,
Yeah.
power,
Uh,
something else?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
And to really understand it, we need to see how this idea plays out in, the Garden of Eden, but also in the story of Jesus.
Okay, so rewind back to the garden. We've got Adam and Eve. They're living in this perfect paradise, right? They have everything they could ever want, but there's that one rule. Don't eat from the tree of knowledge. What do you think about why God put that rule there?
Well, there are a lot of different interpretations out there.
Mm.
Some people see it as a test of obedience.
Mhm.
Others view it as a way to protect humanity from knowledge that they weren't ready for.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's interesting to think about the idea that maybe God was trying to teach Adam and Eve about, boundaries,
Yeah.
about recognizing that there are limits to human, understanding and power.
That's an interesting take. It's like God was saying, hey, I'm God and you're not.
Right, exactly.
But then that serpent slithers in and just like messes everything up.
Exactly. He whispers to Eve, hey, eating this fruit will make you like God.
Mm.
And then he implies that they can kind of like go beyond those boundaries, become something they're not.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really where everything starts to fall apart.
I used to think that serpent was just being like deceitful.
Right.
But now I wonder if he might have been tapping into something like really human, that desire for more, that need to go beyond our limits.
Yeah.
It's almost like he was playing on their ambition.
Yeah, I think you're definitely onto something there. It's like he was saying, hey, you don't have to just be human. You can be like God.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty tempting offer, especially
Mhm.
when you're feeling, kind of dissatisfied or curious.
Right. And the consequences of giving in are huge, right?
Yeah.
They realize they're naked, they feel shame, they get kicked out of paradise. It's like the whole world shifts.
It's often interpreted as the origin of sin, right? That
Yeah.
separation between humanity and God.
Hmm.
And it sets the stage for this need for a bridge,
Right.
this way to restore that relationship.
And that's where the promise of the Messiah comes in. God will send someone to save the world.
Yeah,
But that promise, it's pretty vague, isn't it?
it is. Well, I mean, in the context of Jewish tradition, the Messiah was supposed to be a king, a leader who would restore Israel to its former glory.
Mm-hmm.
But the Christian understanding of the Messiah, well, it's a bit different.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Christians believe that Jesus fulfills that promise, right?
Yeah.
But instead of being this powerful king, he comes as a baby, born in a stable.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? The one who is truly, in the truest sense, to like God doesn't come in power or, might. He comes in vulnerability, in humility.
Yeah.
And that's really a radical reinterpretation of what it means to embody the divine.
It's almost like Jesus is saying, forget what the serpent told you. This is what being close to God is really about.
Exactly. And to understand that, I think we really need to dive into the story of Jesus's birth. We need to see how it offers this counter-narrative to the serpent's lie.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork with the Garden of Eden and this idea of being like God. Now, fast forward, we've got Mary, this young woman. She receives a visit from an angel. This isn't just any angel. This is Gabriel. What's the significance there?
Well, Gabriel shows up at these key moments in history. He delivers these messages that have big implications.
Mm-hmm.
So his presence means that something big is about to happen. He tells Mary that she's going to have a son, and that son will be called Jesus, the Son of God.
Hold on, wait. So we just talked about Adam and Eve trying to be like God,
Right.
and now we have an angel saying that Jesus is the Son of God. That's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah, it is. And it raises all sorts of questions about, the nature of Jesus, his relationship to God, and what it all means for humanity.
For sure. And it gets even more complicated when you consider that Jesus is born into, really humble
Yeah.
circumstances, a stable, a manger, shepherds showing up, not exactly what you'd expect for the Son of God.
Right. And it makes you wonder, is there a connection between his humble beginnings and what it means to be like God?
I'm starting to see how all the pieces fit together. The serpent's promise, the fall from grace, the promise of the Messiah, and now the birth of Jesus in this unexpected setting.
It's all coming together.
It's making sense, but I think there's a lot more to unpack.
Oh, absolutely. The journey from the stable to the cross, that's where things get really interesting. That's where the true meaning of being like God, it really starts to unfold. The story, it doesn't end there. This journey from the stable to the cross, it's where this idea of being like God, it really takes shape.
Help me connect the dots. We've got this baby born in a stable, and he's called the Son of God. How does that connect to what that serpent was saying, that whole God thing?
Well, think about it. The serpent tempted Eve with this idea of knowledge, power, becoming like God through her own actions.
Right, like trying to reach beyond her limits,
Yeah.
to take something that wasn't hers to take.
Yeah. But Jesus, he embodies a completely different kind of likeness to God. He doesn't come to, grab power or knowledge.
Hmm.
He comes to serve, to heal, to teach, and then ultimately to offer himself as a sacrifice.
So instead of taking, he's giving.
Exactly.
Instead of grasping, he's letting go.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
His whole life is like the opposite of what the serpent promised. It's a totally different way of thinking about what being like God even means.
That's pretty deep. But how does a baby in a manger lead to that? What happens that makes people see Jesus as this, ultimate example of God's love and sacrifice?
That promise, it echoed through generations until it landed on this young woman named Mary. An angel, Gabriel, appeared to her and told her she would give birth to Jesus,
Yeah.
the Son of God, the promised Savior.
Wow. I mean, can you imagine what she must have been thinking to be
Ooh.
chosen for something like that?
It's a huge moment. And then we have Joseph, right? At first, he doesn't know what to make of it all.
Right.
Then an angel visits him in a dream and reassures him. He steps into this role of protector and father figure for Jesus.
And then that journey to Bethlehem, I mean, that couldn't have been easy, especially for Mary being pregnant.
And they arrive in Bethlehem only to find that there's no room for them at the inn, the Son of God born in a stable.
What a contrast. It's almost like the story is saying, listen, Jesus's mission is going to be about humility service, not what you'd expect, right?
Right, yeah. It flips everything on its head. And that humility, it runs through Jesus' whole life. He washes his disciples' feet. He eats with sinners and tax collectors. He's always reaching out to the people everyone else ignores.
So it's not just about being born in a stable. It's a whole way of life, right? A way of being in the world,
Yeah.
marked by humility, compassion, service.
Exactly. And eventually, that way of life leads to the cross, the
Mhm.
ultimate act of giving himself up for love. Jesus chooses to die for humanity, even though he could have escaped.
That's where it gets really interesting, because in that sacrifice, I mean, that's what being like God is all about. It's not about power or knowledge. It's about love, selflessness, being willing to give everything for others.
It's like a paradox. By becoming completely vulnerable, by emptying himself, that's how Jesus shows the fullness of God's love.
It's pretty mind-blowing, but how does all this connect to the listener? How does it apply to their life? I mean, these are old stories. What relevance do they have in the 21st century?
Yeah, that's the question, right? I think these stories make us think about what it means to be like God in our own lives.
Hmm.
Are we still trying to grab power and knowledge? Or are we choosing humility, service, love?
It's like the serpent is still out there whispering his lies, tempting us with easy paths to success and fulfillment. But the story of Jesus, it offers a different way, one that's less about achieving greatness and more about living out love.
Right. And I think that message, we need it more than ever today. We're so caught up in competition, trying to see, getting more stuff. But the story of Jesus, it reminds us that real fulfillment comes from giving, from serving, from loving others, no matter what.
It's a tough message, but it's also inspiring. We're being invited to be part of the story of redemption, to let that little bit of the divine that's inside us, let it heal and change the world.
And that's something worth doing. It's not about being perfect or becoming some kind of saint. It's about little acts of kindness, moments of compassion, seeing that spark of the divine in everyone.
So we've looked at the Garden of Eden, the serpent's lies, the birth of Jesus, and how he redefines what it means to be like God. That's a lot, but I'm starting to see how these simple stories have such deep truths about what it means to be human, to be connected to God.
They give us a guide, a way to live a better, more meaningful life, a life that's less about me and more about us, a life that's rooted in love, service, and this deep connection to something bigger than ourselves.
It's a beautiful thought, and I think it's something we can all try for, no matter what our beliefs are, but there's one piece I'm still wrestling with.
Oh, what's that?
The wise men, they brought gifts to baby Jesus: gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
Yeah, those gifts are loaded with symbolism. Gold for kingship, frankincense pointing to divinity,
Hmm.
and myrrh often tied to, burial, foreshadowing Jesus' sacrifice.
I get the symbolism, but what do those gifts mean for us, today? How do they fit into this idea of being like God, the way Jesus showed us? I get the symbolism, but what do those gifts mean for us, today? How do they fit into this idea of being like God, the way Jesus showed us?
Hmm. That's a really good question. It makes you think. I think those gifts, they kind of show us the different sides of what it means to be like God.
Okay, so break that down for me. What do you mean?
Well, gold represents kingship, right? It reminds us that true leadership, it's not about having power over other people. It's about serving, guiding, helping those around us grow,
Okay.
using what we have to make things better like Jesus did.
So not ruling, but leading with humility and compassion.
Exactly. And frankincense, that represents divinity. It's like a reminder that we all have the potential to grow and change spiritually. It's like we're not just physical beings, we're also spiritual beings. We can connect with something bigger than ourselves.
I like that. It's like we each have a little bit of God inside us, and we can nurture that through prayer, meditation, even just being present in the moment.
Right. It's about nurturing that interconnection. And then there's myrrh. That's an oil often used for, anointing and burial. It foreshadows Jesus' sacrifice. It reminds us that real love often means sacrifice, putting others first, giving of ourselves freely.
It's a good reminder, especially around Christmas when so many people are thinking about giving.
Yeah, for sure. And I think those gifts from the wise men, they challenge us. What are we offering to the world?
Yeah.
Are we sharing our talents, our resources? Are we taking care of our own spiritual life? Are we willing to make sacrifices for others?
Those are big questions. And they
Yeah.
go back to that idea of being like, God isn't about trying to be God.
Right.
It's about showing love, compassion, selflessness, like Jesus did.
Exactly. And those qualities, we can show them in so many ways through our work, our relationships, how we create, how we treat each other every day.
So it's not about becoming God, but about letting God kind of shine through us
Mm.
in our own way.
Yes, exactly. Recognizing that spark of the divine within us and letting it light up the world, embodying those values that Jesus showed us: love, service, sacrifice.
It's beautiful, something we can all strive for. So we started with this question about what the serpent promised Eve. And we've gone from the Garden of Eden to the stable in Bethlehem. We've explored what it really means to be like God. Quite a deep dive.
It really has been. And I don't think the conversation ends here. These stories, they keep challenging us, inspiring us to live better lives, lives with more meaning. They push us to think about the big questions. Who are we? Why are we here? What kind of world do we want?
Maybe that's the real gift of these stories. They help us understand ourselves, our place in the universe. They offer us guidance, wisdom, and this timeless message of hope.
I think so. And as we keep exploring these stories, I hope we find within them the strength, the courage, the inspiration to live lives that reflect the best of what it means to be human, to be like a God in the truest sense.